What the Shepherds Saw. A Story of 4 Moonlight Nights. 1. First Night. The Christmas moon was showing her cold face to the low hills called the Marlbury Downs, in the south-western part of England, known as Mid-Wessex. Here, sheep were kept out on the hills all year round, and lambs were born as early as December. Shepherds needed to be on the hills day and night at this time of the year, and often used small wheeled huts
hut,
where they could rest and keep warm while keeping a careful eye on the sheep. On a high piece of land, one of these huts stood inside a little circle of trees, which kept it out of the icy wind and also hidden from any passers-by.
Passers-by.
The hut was made of wood, wind, and also hidden from any passers-by. The hut was made of wood and had a door and 2 windows. The north one looked out on the 800 sheep which were in the shepherd's care, and the south window gave a view of 3 ancient stones, built in the shape of a doorway. These great stones, which village people called the Devil's Door, had been there for over 2,000 years. They were worn and weather-beaten, but tonight looked almost new in the silver light of the moon. Inside the hut, a young shepherd boy was waiting for his master, who entered at that moment. "Are you sleepy?" asked the old man crossly. "No, master," replied the boy, who was a little frightened of the shepherd and his heavy stick. "The sheep should be all right until the morning now," said the shepherd, "but one of us must stay here, so I'll leave ye, do you hear? I'll go home and sleep for a few hours. Run down to my cottage and fetch me if anything
cottage, fetch,
I'll leave ye, do you hear? I'll go home and sleep for a few hours. Run down to my cottage and fetch me if anything happens. Ye can have a bit of sleep in the chair by the stove, but only for a few minutes, mind. Make sure you stay awake the rest of the time, and don't let that fire go out." The old man closed the door and disappeared. The boy went out to check on the sheep and newborn lambs, and then came back into the hut and sat down by the warm stove. Soon his eyes closed, his head dropped, and he was asleep. When he woke up, he could hear down in the valley the clock at Shake Forest Towers striking 11. The sound carried well in the cold night air. He looked out of the north window and saw the sheep lying on the grass as quietly as before. He next looked out of the opposite window towards the stones of the Devil's Door, white and ghostly in the moonlight, and in front of them stood a man. It was clear that he was not a farm worker, because he was wearing a dark suit and carried himself like a gentleman. The boy was still wondering, in great surprise, why the man was visiting the Devil's Door at this hour, when suddenly another figure appeared. This second figure was a woman, and when the stranger saw her, he hurried towards her. He met her near the trees and took her into his arms. "You have come, Harriet, thank you," he cried warmly. "But not for this," replied the lady, pulling away from him. She added more kindly, "I have come, Fred, because you begged me. Why did you ask to see me?" "Harriet, I have seen many lands and faces since I last walked these hills, but I have only thought of you. Was it only to tell me this that you begged me to meet you out here on the hills so late at night? Harriet, be honest with me. I have heard that the Duke is unkind to you." "He sometimes gets angry, but he is a good husband. Harriet, dearest, is that really true? Doesn't everybody know that your life with him is a sad one? I have come to find out what I can do. You are a duchess, and I'm only Fred Ogborne, but it's still possible that I can help you. By God, the sweetness of your voice should keep him pleasant, especially when the sweetness of your face is added to it." "Captain Ogborne," she cried, half afraid, half playful, "you're an old friend. How can you speak to me in this way? Remember, I'm a married woman. I was wrong to come. I see that now." "You call me Captain Ogborne," he replied, unhappily. "But I was always Fred to you before. I think you no longer have any feeling for me. My love for you, Harriet, has not changed at all. But you are a different woman now. I must accept it. I can never see you again." "You needn't talk like that, you stupid man. You can see me again. Why not? But of course, not like this. It was a mistake of mine to come tonight, and I only did it because the Duke is away at the moment." "When does he return?" "The day after tomorrow, or the day after that. Then meet me again tomorrow night." "No, Fred, I cannot." "If you cannot tomorrow night, you can the night after. Please let me have one more meeting before he returns, to say goodbye. Now, promise me." He took the Duchess's hand. "No, Fred, let go of my hand. It's not kind of you to make me feel sorry for you, and then to keep me here like this. But see me once more. I have come 2,000 miles to see you." "Oh, I must not. People will talk. Don't ask it of me." "Then confess 2 things to me."
Confess.
"That you did love me once, and that your husband is unkind to you often enough to make you think of the time when you loved me." "Yes, I confess them both," she answered quietly. "Come once more." He still held her hand and had his arm around her waist. "Very well, then," she said finally. "I agree. I'll meet you tomorrow night or the night after. Now let me go." He set her free and watched her hurry down the hill towards her home, Shake Forest Towers. Then he turned and walked away. In a few minutes, all was silent and empty again. But only for a moment. Suddenly, a third figure appeared from behind the stones. He was a man of heavier build than the captain and was wearing riding boots. He was a man of heavier build than the captain and was wearing riding boots. It was clear that he had watched the meeting between the captain and the Duchess. He had been too far away to hear their conversation and the lady's reluctant words, so
reluctant, reluctant.
To him, they had the appearance of lovers. But several more years passed before the boy was old enough to understand this. This third figure stood still for a moment, thinking. Then he went back into the trees and came out again with his horse. He rode off. And the sound of the horse's feet on the hard ground was heard for several minutes, until it died away. The boy stayed in the hut, his eyes still on the stones. But nobody else appeared there. Suddenly he felt a heavy hand on his shoulder which made him jump. "Now, look here, young Bill Mills. You've let the fire in the stove go out. Well, what's happened, you bad boy?" "Nothing, master." "Sheep and lambs all safe and well?" "Yes, master." The old shepherd spoke angrily. "Well, that's where you're wrong. There are 2 new lambs out there, born just this minute, and one of the mothers is half dead. I told you to stay awake, boy, and fetch me if I was needed. Well, what have you got to say for yourself?" "You said that I could have a bit of sleep in the chair by the stove. You said." "Don't you speak to your elders and betters like that, young man, or you'll end up hanging from a rope at the prison. Well, you can go home now and come back again by breakfast time. I'm an old man, but there's no rest for me." The old shepherd then lay down inside the hut, and the boy went down the hill to his home in the village. Two. Second night. The next evening the old shepherd left the boy alone in the hut again, with repeated orders to keep a careful eye on the sheep. But young Bill was only interested in the view from the south window. He watched and waited while the moonlight shone on the ancient stones. But neither the captain nor Duchess appeared. When he heard the Shake Forest Tower's clock strike 11, he saw the third figure appear. As the man came towards the hut, the moonlight shone full on his face, and the boy realised in horror that it was the Duke. All the villagers lived in fear of the Duke. He owned every farm and every house for miles around, and anybody who made him angry could lose their home and their job in a moment. The boy closed the stove and quickly hid himself in a corner of the hut. The Duke came close to the place where his wife and the captain had stood the night before. He looked around, perhaps for a hiding place. When he discovered the hut among the trees, he entered and stood at the south window, looking out at the Devil's Door. Only a minute or 2 later the captain arrived to wait for the Duchess, but a terrible surprise was waiting for him tonight, as well as for the frightened boy hidden in the hut. At the captain's appearance, the Duke became very angry. He opened the door of the hut and stepped out. "You have dishonoured her, and for that you shall die," he cried. In the hut, the boy left his hiding place and ran to the window. He could not see the 2 men, but he heard something falling on the grass, and then silence. 3 minutes later, he saw the Duke going up the hill towards the stones, pulling the captain's body along the ground. The boy knew that behind the Devil's Door there was a deep hole, covered by long grass and other plants. The Duke made his way slowly to the shadows behind the stones, and when he came out, he was pulling nothing behind him. "Now for the second," the boy heard him say. This time, the Duke waited outside the hut. It was clear that he expected his wife, the Duchess, to arrive next at the meeting place. Inside the hut, young Bill shook with fear. "What will he do if she comes?" he thought. "Will he kill her too? He looks angry enough, and he can do what he likes. He's the Duke. Nobody can stop him." The jealous watcher waited for some time. But she never came. Sometimes he looked at his watch in surprise. He seemed almost disappointed that she did not appear. At 11:30, he turned away to find his horse and rode slowly down the hill. The young boy thought of what lay in the hole behind the stones and was too frightened to stay alone in the hut. He preferred to be with someone who was alive, even the Duke, than with someone who was dead. So he ran after the horseman. He followed the Duke all the way down into the valley, feeling more comfortable when the lonely hills were left behind him. Soon he could see the high walls and roofs of the Duke's home, Shake Forest Towers. When the Duke got close to the great house, a small door in a side wall opened and a woman came out. She ran into the moonlight to meet the Duke. "Ah, my dear, is it you?" she said. "I heard your horse's step on the road and knew it must be you." "Happy to see me, are you?" "How can you ask that?" "Well, it is a lovely night for meetings." "Yes, it is a lovely night." The Duke got down from his horse and stood by her side. "Why were you listening for me at this time of night?" he asked. "There is a strange story which I must tell you at once, but why did you come a night sooner than you said? I am sorry, I really am," shaking her head playfully, "because I had ordered a special dinner for your arrival tomorrow, and now it won't be a surprise at all." The Duke did not look at his wife. "What is this strange story that you wish to tell me?" he asked quietly. "It is this. You know my cousin Fred Ogborne? We used to play together when we were children, and he loved me, I think. I told you about it, you know." "You have never told me of it before." "Oh, then it was your sister. Yes, I told her about it. Well, I haven't seen him for many years, and of course I'd forgotten all about his feeling for me, so I was surprised to receive a letter from him yesterday. I can remember what he wrote. 'My dear cousin Harriet,' the letter said, 'if my life and future mean anything to you at all, I beg you to do what I ask. Meet me at 11 o'clock tonight by the ancient stones on Marlbury Downs. I cannot say more, except to beg you to come. I will explain everything when I see you. Come alone. You have all my happiness in your hands. Yours, Fred.'" That was his letter. Now I realise that it was a mistake to go, but at the time I only thought he must be in trouble, and with not a friend in the world to help him. So I went to Marlbury Downs at 11 o'clock. Wasn't it brave of me?" "Very," replied the Duke coldly. "When I got there, I saw he was no longer the boy that I remembered, but a full-grown man and an officer. I was sorry I had come. What he wanted, I don't know. Perhaps just a meeting with me. He held me by the hand and waist and refused to let me go until I promised to meet him again."
Waist.
He held me by the hand and waist and refused to let me go until I promised to meet him again. And in the end I did, because he spoke very warmly to me, and I was afraid of him in that lonely place. Then I escaped. I ran home. And that's all. Of course, I never meant to meet him there again. But this evening I thought, perhaps he'll come to the house when he realises I'm not coming to meet him, and that's why I couldn't sleep. But you are so silent." "I have had a long journey." They moved on towards the front entrance of the house. "I have thought of something, but perhaps you won't like it," she said. "I think he will wait there again tomorrow night. Shall we go to the hill tomorrow together, just to see if he is there, and tell him he must not try to meet me like this?" "Why should we see if he is there?" asked her unsmiling husband. "Why should we see if he is there?" asked her unsmiling husband. "Because I think we should try to help him. Poor Fred! He will listen to you if you talk to him. It is wrong of him to think of me in that way, but he is clearly very miserable." By this time they had reached the front entrance and rung the bell. A man came to take the horse away, and the Duke and Duchess entered the house.